Are those prayers being answered, Rose?
Well, that is for God to do. That is for God to do.
On a good day. I think all I would say, if I can come in, is that I think we shouldn't believe that the world is basically free of ideology. Along come these religious people and start, putting prayers everywhere and muddying the water. We live in a world where we're surrounded by ideologies, messages, most of them commercial. You can't walk down a street without an injunction to eat more chocolate or buy this holiday or whatever. And occasionally you get some reminders to pray to God. So in the midst of reminders to go shopping, you get an odd message to pray to God and an odd message to, go to your local library or something. All I'm saying is the world outside our doors is full of messages.
Yeah.
Some are religious, some are commercial, some are public information. There's a lot of stuff out there. And I think it's a bit naive of certain militant atheists to go out there and argue as though religious messages are the only and most powerful messages out there. They're not. They're a tiny, tiny little voice that occasionally says things like, be nice to your neighbor. And if you have a problem with that, why don't you first start with the messages that are emanating from, the drinks companies, the tobacco companies, the car companies? Aren't these more fitting targets of, people's anger and self-righteousness than the odd reminder to be nice to your brother?
Alan, thank you very much. Rose, thank you.
Well, I just think your last speaker was brilliant. I'd love a copy of his book.
Oh, don't give it too many plugs. He's just been criticising commercialisation.
Well,
Alan, thank you very much. Rose,
thank you so much.
Rose, thank you. And
take care.
What time do prayers take place in the Commons? Have you missed today's?
No. They're on recess. The Commons on recess this week.
Yeah.
Yes, but I will continue to pray because I believe it.
Please continue to pray. You're our last hope. Thank you, Keith.
Bye-bye.
More to come as well. 9:32 we'll come to calls and we'll come to Simon with the weather. Right, it's Baroness Warsi. Does she have a point? Is Britain being taken over by militant secularists? We have Dr. Evan Harris, a former Lib Dem MP, Vice President of the British Humanist Association. Dr. Harris, I presume. Good morning.
Good morning.
Andrew Marsh from Christian Concern, Christian Lobby Group. Hello, Andrew.
Morning, Nicky.
Hello. And Mark in Lancashire. You want to come on after Nathaniel's call, which got a lot of text. He said that if you don't go through Jesus Christ, well, he's the only conduit to eternal paradise. There ain't no other way. Mark, you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I do. I'll just nail my colours to the mast. I'm a lifelong Christian. I'm 52 years old. Jesus did say, I am the way, the truth, and the life. But he also said, judge not, that you be not judged. And the basic pillar of Christianity is that Jesus died for all mankind. And I don't think it's for us to speak for Jesus and say who he will and will not take to heaven.
All right, well, Rose took your position. She took issue with him as well. Thank you for putting that into context. Stay there if you will. I want to speak to a couple other people before we go to a couple of other callers before we go to Evan and Andrew on this. Councillor Imran Khan, Tory councillor from Banstead, on the issue of prayers at council meetings, do they have a place?
Good morning, Nicky. Well, I don't think prayers or politics in general should be a part of politics. I'm all for doing what the judgment clearly states that councils can do, which is pray prior to the meeting itself proper. It shouldn't be a part of the formal agenda process, however. I don't need God's help to help me make the facts. Local residents ask me issues on rubbish collection and about the roads, for example, and I look at the facts to do that. I've got no problem with people praying prior to the meeting.
Okay, thank you for that. It's the time and the place, basically. Andrew Marsh, I would imagine you have great sympathy with what Baroness Warsi is saying here. Something reminiscent of totalitarian regimes, a rising tide of militant secularisation. Do you echo those comments, Andrew?
Yes, I do. I think, and I agree with Alan Bolton as well, when you look into it, as he does, and he said that he was surprised to find it once he began to examine the evidence, is that there is a highly organised, media-savvy campaign on the part of some atheists, I think, a small minority, but very vocal, to try and find any whiff of particularly Christian influence in public life, and to stamp on it and to squeeze it out. One of the things, a couple of things I think are very interesting about Baroness Warsi's comments today. The first is that she doesn't speak as a Christian herself, and yet she is speaking of the benefits of the influence of Jesus Christ on our nation.
She speaks as a theist.
Yeah, but she's not personally claiming to belong to the Christian faith.
She believes in the same God, presumably, doesn't she?
But she's expounding the benefits and focusing our attention, highlighting the benefit that the influence of Jesus Christ over many hundreds of years has brought to this nation in terms of our freedoms, our beliefs, our structures, our common values, and how it has actually created a culture and a society and even a political system that shows respect for the other but brings us together rather than drives us apart. And she does that, not speaking as a Christian. I think that's a very helpful point to underline, to recognise that the influence of Jesus Christ, who is, after all, a man who...
But some of the great Christians, some of the most faithful people of religion, are secularists.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand.
There's a difference between secularism and atheism, isn't there? Look at America, the separation between church and state.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes some of those secularizing campaigning groups set up a false dichotomy for us here. They seem to suggest that you will either end up in a totalitarian regime ruled by one religion or another that dictates on every area of citizens' life, whatever their faith.
Theocracy, yeah.
Or that you've got or to avoid that, the only other option is to exclude Christian influence and possibly the influence of other religion from every area of public life. So they want to say that it is fine perhaps for you to practice your religion in the privacy of your own home, to pray at home or behind closed doors, but in terms of our public life and our civic life and our community life, that has no part to play, and how dare you bring it into this public domain? And we need to be really clear what that is.
Dr. Evan Harris.
Well, I don't recognise that description. I mean, it's hard to find one, I think, more of a secular campaigner than me. And what secularism is about, secular campaigning is saying that we want to end religious privilege, that it shouldn't have a special place. There shouldn't be reserved places in Parliament for people with religious views as opposed to any other worldview, that there shouldn't be schools that are allowed to say you can't come to this school that you live next door to, that you pay your taxes towards, because you're of the wrong religion or no religion, or you can't even teach in this state school funded 100% by the taxpayer because you go to the wrong building on a Sunday, or you're living with someone you're not married to. So what we're saying is, and this is true the worldwide, that secular liberal democracies are the best buttress for religious freedom of everyone. And I think we need to be very clear that those people who say that there are sort of militant atheists, I mean, it's like saying you sleep furiously. It's just an atheist with an opinion is called militant by religious groups who, like Andrew's group, are a political campaigning organisation. He's perfectly entitled to argue in the public sphere, as he's doing now, that we should allow people to discriminate against gay people on the basis of their religious views. That is what Christian Concern for One Nation does, campaigns for. I disagree with it, but it's perfectly entitled to do that. It campaigns for a number of other things. It shouldn't do it from a position of privilege. It should just get stuck into the political debate like everyone else.
A free market of thought, yeah?
Absolutely. So it's just a question of saying there shouldn't be a privileged position for religion. But
Andrew, in a minute, I will let you come back in a minute. I want to hear where this is over to Matthew in Derby now. It's your call. Matthew, you believe that there has not been a proper Christian perspective on the show yet?
It concerns me because every time I hear you on a show, Nikki, you strike me as being very anti-religion, and that really has bled through on the show today, especially the call regarding children who die in infancy going to hell.
Right.
It doesn't stipulate that in the Bible. That's a Catholic doctrine.
All right.
And to say that Catholicism represents the whole of Christianity is is...
No, I mentioned that because Baroness Warsi is on her way to meet the Pope in the Vatican today, so that's why it was relevant to say, having accused secularism of totalitarianism, there is much that Catholicism has, on the record, apologised for. It's apologised over the Holocaust, it's apologised to Darwin, it's apologised to Galileo, it's apologised for the Inquisition, it's apologised for any number of things. So I was purely putting that in context. But listen, over to you. Tell us your position on this.
Well, I'm a father of 2 children, one of them school age. And at school, it's very difficult for my son to represent his Christian values. He's only a young child, but he still has Christian values. We believe in the creation, we believe in the Bible literally, but we don't ram our beliefs down people's throats. We let people express their opinions, and we have open debate about them. We don't necessarily believe everything that the secularists or the atheists say, and they don't believe everything we say. But I think we're getting into an argument here, is we have one part of society, the secularists and the atheists, pushing their agenda into society, which I think marginalises Christians. I mean, the debate you had on earlier, you had Richard Dawkins on. And I know that Richard Dawkins is fabulously well-educated, and he has an argument about not allowing creationism to be taught in school, to get rid of it altogether, and that kids should only be taught about evolutionism. Now, if you don't believe in evolutionism, my son's going to be taught this at school, and he hasn't got a right to rebuttal that argument.
This is Evan Harris, this is a very, very good point, the teaching of non-science in science classes. Evan Harris.
Well, I don't think non-science should be taught as science in any classes. So it's not good enough to say we shouldn't teach creationism as how the world came into being and how the animals and humans evolved in science lessons. It shouldn't be taught as fact in religious education lessons. People should...
Or whatever. And occasionally you get some reminders to pray to God. So in the midst of reminders to go shopping, you get an odd message to pray to God and an odd message to, I don't know, go to your local library or something. All I'm saying is the world outside our doors is full of messages.
Yeah.
Along come these religious people and start, putting prayers everywhere and muddying the water. We live in a world where we're surrounded by ideologies, messages, most of them commercial. You can't walk down a street without an injunction to eat more chocolate or buy this holiday. Some are religious, some are commercial, some are public information. There's a lot of stuff out there. And I think it's a bit naive of certain militant atheists to go out there and argue as though religious messages are the only and most powerful messages out there. They're not. They're a tiny, tiny little voice that occasionally says things like, be nice to your neighbour. And if you have a problem with that, why don't you first start with the messages that are emanating from, the drinks companies, the tobacco companies, the car companies? Aren't these more...
Are those prayers being answered, Rose?
Well, that is for God to do. That is for God to do.
On a good day. I think all I would say, if I can come in, is that I think we shouldn't believe that the world is basically free of ideology.